And it's BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? And I just noticed that my head is a little bit out of frame. That was some real technological advancements right there. That's called, like, scooching your body down. How's everybody doing, by the way? Good morning. Hello, Tyler Scott in the live chat. Nice to see you here. Andrew WVA, my brother from West Virginia, another West Virginian at heart. So nice to see you guys on this Zodiac Monday. If you're wondering why my voice sounds a little bit different, that's because in my day job, I'm required to say a lot of things. And for 2 days, I actually lost my voice. Like the way that people would talk about, like the opera singers and so on, when they were absolutely physically unable to talk. I was like that for 2 days. So I'm gonna be trying this thing out here. Let's see how long I can go for Zodiac Monday. But there are a lot of things that I want to talk to you guys about. And by the way, if anybody is listening live, please put in the live chat. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me through like the sound system and all that? Just let me know if everything sounds normal. And if something sounds a little bit different, then feel free to give any type of feedback. So, firstly, I would like to give a big thank you to everybody who watched the episode that I did on Ross Geraci's channel, Planet X Filmworks. That was in place of last week's Zodiac Monday, and I was talking to Ross all about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and the Texarkana Phantom Killer, also known as the Moonlight Murders. And I think that all of these stories are interconnected. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer that operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And then, of course, there was also the inspirations that could have come previously from cases like the Phantom Killer. The Phantom Killer was a serial killer that operated in Texarkana, Texas, and Arkansas in 1946. Very similar because the Zodiac is a serial killer that targeted couples that were parked in cars at lovers' lanes, sneaking up on them, firing gunshots. And the Phantom Killer targeted couples that were parked in cars at lovers' lanes, sneaking up on them, firing gunshots. Both killers wore hooded costumes. Both killers targeted male and female victims. A big difference is, though, that the Phantom Killer was known to commit sexual assaults, and the Zodiac was not. And that's going to be very important for today's episode. And we have some other people here. We have Kolchak. Hey, Kolchak, how's it going? And Melissa Tappa, the webmaster of ZodiacKillerBomb.com. Hello, Melissa. And Satanic Mayhem. And Satanic Mayhem says, hello, Ned. How are you? I am fine. Thank you so much. My voice is a little bit different, but I am just going to be plowing through this one. So I would like to begin first by responding to a couple comments that people had. Firstly, I have to give a big shout out to Fire Pixie, who said that she enjoyed my appearance on Ross Geraci's channel Planet X Filmworks, even though Ned sounds like human Valium. Ned is human Valium, turning people into a giant ball of muscle relaxation. And I love Fire Pixie too, because you guys got to remember the old Stones Unturned podcast on Thomas Horace's channel, the old school version. And that's when people would just hang out over there, like Fire Pixie and Tarbell and Creepy Crawl and Mike Stratocaster and, of course, Evan from Texas. And it was really more focused on the true crime cases like the Zodiac Killer, as well as perhaps the stories of Charles Manson and looking at some different theories, the CIA and the global elites. And even though the professor is getting a little bit back on Charles Manson, it seems like he is going to more or less explore the cases in different ways now. And as I understand, the majority of this show is behind a paywall. He only does the previews for his show, the Stones Unturned podcast, on YouTube, and then you have to pay for the full episodes. So the Stones Unturned used to be very different. And when I say old school, I mean even before the professor was appearing on camera and it was all done in the podcast format. And I would also like to give a shout out to the person who said that they disagreed with me about a particular observation in regards to the Zodiac Killer. And that is that there was a murder that took place in 1888 on December 20th, and that's the murder of Rose Milett. The Zodiac Killer's first crime was on December 20th of 1968, and that's the Lake Herman Road murders, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. And I mean, I was completely honest with you guys on Planet X Filmworks. I was saying that I thought that it's possible that that was an inspiration. The murder of Rose Milett occurred on December 20th of 1888. She is thought to have been a Jack the Ripper victim by some. Not everybody agrees with that. I personally don't even agree with that, but I think the more important part is the Zodiac Killer was an avid reader of true crime magazines and books, and he was perhaps not somebody who was very scatterbrained in that regard, very good at reading things that he was fascinated with, perhaps even just very good at reading, period, absorbing information. And I think hands down it's fair to say, it's safe to say that the Zodiac was familiar with other true crime cases, and he incorporated them into his Zodiac Killer persona. And one thing, though, that I got into a little bit of heat for on Ross's channel was talking about how could the Zodiac have been thinking about a Jack the Ripper crime or possible Jack the Ripper crime as the foundation of his first murder? Because the Lake Herman Road murders, the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, took place on December 20th of 1888. So someone just has it in the back of their mind that December 20th, December 20th, December 20th. And I mean, the challenge was the other person didn't think that the Zodiac had any real significance to the dates, that this was someone who hunted people for sport. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer that, by his own admission, wanted to kill people because man is the most dangerous animal of all. That's what he said in the 408 cipher. So, what's he going to do? He's just kind of cruising around periodically. And the dates of Zodiac activity may not have had any real significant meaning to him. The Zodiac committed at least 4 known crimes: the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the murder of Paul Stein. And the dates don't really make a whole lot of sense. December 20th, July 4th, September 27th, and October 11th. Not a whole lot of reasons can be placed on that. Batman66 is here. Hey, Batman, how's it going? And also, some people are just thinking the Zodiac didn't put any planning into the numbers. He's just this guy driving around California periodically, and when he has the opportunity, he commits the murder because people are in a vulnerable place. And this is why I don't do too well in those types of discussions, because my answer is always the same. Well, that's possible. It's an unsolved case. Who am I to say that that's wrong? I'm not selling you anything Zodiac related. Yes, that's also a reasonable theory. But based on the amount of similarities that I've noticed between Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer, I do think that he could have had December 20th in the back of his mind because of the murder of Rose Milet, a possible Jack the Ripper victim. And I laid it all out on Ross's channel about all of the similarities that I noticed between the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper, and how I thought the Zodiac Killer was using Jack the Ripper as a playbook. And I also have a couple episodes about that here on this channel: the Zodiac Killer versus Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer versus Jack the Ripper Extended Edition. And I invite you to hit the like button and subscribe if you're curious about these true crime discussions. In this episode, I would also like to talk about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. And if you are not a follower of the Citizen Detective podcast, I invite you to go over to that channel and hit the like button and subscribe over there. The Citizen Detective podcast is hosted by Mike Morford, Alex Ralph, and Lee Meller. And it has some like regular guest panelists, such as Cloyd Steiger, whom I've interviewed. Cloyd Steiger was a real life homicide detective, and he has appeared on this channel, Black Box Online Radio, talking about his book on the serial killer Gary Gene Grant called Seattle's Forgotten Serial Killer. But in the episode that came out recently, they were talking about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, a series of homicides that took place right after the Zodiac murders. Again, the Zodiac is a serial killer that is operating in California in 1968 and 69. In the early 1970s, we have the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, which took place in the vicinity of the Zodiac's crimes, in the Zodiac's backyard. And I might be saying that literally because Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect in the Zodiac killer mystery, owned a trailer in Santa Rosa. Robert Graysmith, author of Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked, wrote directly about this in Zodiac Unmasked when he was just saying that he thought that Arthur Lee Allen was the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer, or at the very least, he should be a strong suspect in this set of homicides. And we have something here from Andrew WVA, who says, I have a theory about the dates of Lake Berryessa and Presidio Heights, and that they were chosen on purpose. Hey, Andrew, please put your idea in the live chat, and I'll respond to that as soon as you put that out. But to continue with the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, I'm watching the Citizen Detective podcast, and I love the observations that are made by Dr. Lee Meller. He's a real criminologist. I'm just some guy on the internet, and I'm just someone who reads books and watches YouTube videos like anybody else. But he's a criminologist who works on cases. He's dealt with hundreds of cold cases. He has 7 books out on the subjects. And some of the background info that they shared was number one, there are 16 victims that can fall under this term of Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. And a big difference is there are different types of methods that were used, but people still believe that it was either the same killer or killers. One victim was even poisoned with strychnine. It sounds like we're going back to the Jack the Ripper stuff, Victorian England. The serial killer Thomas Neil Cream, who's a Jack the Ripper suspect, killed his victims with strychnine. He was a serial killer called the Lambeth Poisoner. So you have 16 victims in the early 1970s, killed in very different ways compared to that of the Zodiac killer. As I said, the Zodiac snuck up on people, fired some gunshots, and ran away. The Zodiac did tie up some of the victims, 2 victims at Lake Berryessa, stabbed them. The Zodiac killed Paul Stein in a taxi, wiped it down, and then walked away. But what do we make of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings? Females, lone women who are targeted. There are sexual assaults. Semen is left behind. And this is something that I thought was always so bizarre to me. It's not just that the bodies were taken from the victims and they were dumped in various locations. Now, that's not abnormal. Serial killers do that all the time, right? Not all serial killers are like the Zodiac, where they kill the victims and then run away, which is what the Zodiac did, which is what Jack the Ripper and the Phantom Killer also did. Lots of serial killers will murder the victims and then toss the bodies in ways of discarding them so they don't get caught. Now, as far as the activities of the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, this is the fascinating stuff that Dr. Lee Miller was talking about. Again, as a real criminal profiler, criminologist, he's saying that the evidence in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings indicates that there are multiple attackers. But the Zodiac, you could say a single attacker. Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayers, maybe it's not even the Zodiac, it's 2 people. It's a team. And I said that I thought some things were rather bizarre about the way the Santa Rosa killer would discard the victims and dispose of the victims, because in one instance, I'm going off of memory on this, but I believe the victim was carried at least 100 yards, the length of a football field, to the dump site. Very different than that of the Zodiac killer, but I was just thinking, no matter how big this woman was, that's not something that is completely normal. It's physically possible for some men to carry the dead body of a woman for 100 yards, but that isn't really, it just did something that always seemed a little bit different about that to me. Now, if there were a team of 2 people, that makes a little bit more sense. The victims in the Santa Rosa case were also thrown off cliffs, thrown over embankments on the side of the road. Their bodies are discarded. And someone has gone through great lengths to discard the bodies, not exactly eviscerating the remains, but discarding the bodies. And also, the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayers, if there are 2 people, they seem to have a very particular type of victim profile, targeting lone females. And I have been the loudest voice on the entire internet saying, when you have these murders where people are targeting lone females, that tends to be quite different than that of the Zodiac from the 1960s, because the Zodiac targeted couples and one lone male, never a lone female. I think all of the unconfirmed crimes involving lone females were not the same killer. But with the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayers, not only are they lone females, but almost always they are Caucasians. They have a very particular type of appearance. So instantly, on Citizen Detective, everybody's just saying, this sounds like Ted Bundy. Now, was Ted Bundy the actual Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayer? That's not what they mean. Ted Bundy's their suspect. It sounds like the way that Ted Bundy committed the crimes. We've all heard the story about how Ted Bundy had a falling out with a woman named Stephanie Brooks. So his victim profile was more or less choosing women that resembled her features, long dark hair parted in the middle. And I don't think it's in the Ted Bundy movie called Ted Bundy. I think it's in the movie called The Stranger Beside Me, based on Ann Rule's book, when they have a character, the character Stephanie Brooks is on screen just saying, All of his victims look like me. They all look like me. And Stephanie Brooks is not her real name, by the way. It's an alias that was created for the media. But that's what they think the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayers were doing, targeting women with a very specific set of features. But the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayers did not only target Caucasians. One of their most famous crimes is the murder of Jeanette Haley, and she is a victim who was of Pacific Islander descent. But I said that I would get to Andrew's theory about the Zodiac killer, and Andrew's going to be talking about the Lake Berryessa stabbing and the Stein murder. The Lake Berryessa stabbing was on September 27th of 1969, and the Stein murder was on October 11th. And I'm just going to scroll up here so I can get Andrew's full thing. I have a theory on the dates of Lake Berryessa and Presidio Heights, and Presidio Heights is where Paul Stein was killed, and that they were chosen on purpose. Sunday, September 27th of 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were attacked by the Zodiac at Lake Berryessa. Wednesday, October 9th, 1968, Officer O'Brien was charged with the murder of George Baskett. Am I reading that correctly? I'm a little bit far away from my screen. Yeah, Baskett, Baskett. Saturday, October 11th, Paul Stein was shot and killed by Zodiac. Richard Gaikowski would have been angered by the fatal shooting of George Baskett, an African American. Richard Gaikowski is, of course, one of the most widely discussed Zodiac killer suspects out there. He was a journalist, member of the counterculture movement, also had a lot of other passions and interests, film for being one of them. But I think what Andrew is referring to is Geik's involvement with counterculture and progressive rights, civil rights, all of those things. Richard Gaikowski would have been angered greatly about the fatal shooting of George Baskett, an African American. Gaikowski was heavily into the civil rights scene in Albany, New York, and often wrote articles about the Brothers, a group of African American men fighting for equal rights. And this is, a theory that the dates were chosen for specific reasons. And that is if Richard Gaikowski is your suspect. But Andrew, a lot of people are going to be disputing that with you. Steve Allen is here, and he says, hello, everyone. Hello, Steve. And we have a question coming to us from Irish Brummy. First, welcome, Irish Brummy. He says, Ned, why was the park ranger at Lake Berryessa a suspect? Now, there are multiple park rangers at Lake Berryessa, but on September 27th of 1969, Dennis Land and William White were the responding park rangers. Dennis Land was the first one on scene. William White was the second. And one of the things that the surviving victim at the Lake Berryessa stabbing, Brian Hartnell, reported was that when he first saw Dennis Land coming to his rescue, he thought that the Zodiac killer had come back. That's one. Physical similarities in the body type. But if you watch the documentary, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, which is all about the previously mentioned Thomas Henry Horan, Horan just lays out all of his reasons why he thinks that Dennis Land was the Lake Berryessa stabber. Number one, he says that Dennis Land was out of radio contact at the time of the stabbing. And Thomas Horan had said that for years. He wrote it in his book. But in the Myth of the Zodiac Killer documentary, you can actually see him going through the logs and talking about how there is just this gap in the radio logs when Dennis Land should have been on duty. So that's number one. Number two, as a park ranger, he would have had access to authorized entry only roads that would have been prohibited to the general public so he could sneak around the park and be undetected. And number three, Dennis Land dealt with a lot of mental instability issues in his life, and I don't even want to get into those details too much. But in The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, if you read that book by Thomas Henry Horan, it talks about very clearly that Dennis Land, the park ranger at Lake Berryessa, is not only his suspect, but it's not only a suspect for the Lake Berryessa stabbing, a Zodiac crime, also the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayers. He thinks that Dennis Land committed the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. And you have the similarity of the victims being hogtied, tied up and bound. The victims are tied up at Lake Berryessa, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. Multiple victims in the Santa Rosa case are tied up. In maybe a similar way, they're hogtied. But those were sexual crimes. And on Citizen Detective, they even point out that there's a lot of sexual sadism going on. Someone who is getting enjoyment from creating sexual pain in the victim. And that definitely seems to be something that's taking place there on with the victims. And I just don't think the Zodiac did that. Was the Zodiac a sadist? Yes. Did he feel some type of arousal from the crimes? Yes. Was he a sexual sadist? I don't think so, because that's not the way that the crimes were committed. But to answer Irish Crummie's question, there's a final reason why the park ranger at Lake Berryessa, Dennis Land, is a suspect in the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and that is because he destroyed the crime scene. He violated all of the procedures by taking up the blanket that Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were on, and he just, at first, I think what I read in the police reports was he wanted to put it around Cecilia Shepard because she was injured, and then he folded it up and put it into a box, violated all of the procedures. Now, was that because he did the stabbing, or was that because of something else? And Sigmund Ooze is here, and he says, different killer for each murder. You got to write out more than that, Sigmund Ooze. I want to hear details on that. And Batman 66 says, I'm starting to suspect Officer Richard Hoffman, like a few others, for the Lake Berryessa attacks. Richard Hoffman was the officer who was patrolling the Blue Rock Springs Park about 10 minutes before the Blue Rock Springs shooting, which saw the death of Darlene Ferrin, a possible Zodiac, well, a Zodiac crime, but Richard Hoffman is a possible Zodiac killer suspect. And Cat Daddy Steve is here. Hey, Cat Daddy Steve. I'm thinking Lawrence Kane may have done the Lake Berryessa killings as a Zodiac copycat. And Cat Daddy Steve, what exactly are you thinking about in regards to that? Lawrence Kane is one of the most widely discussed Zodiac killer suspects. I have numerous episodes about him. But as far as only being a suspect in Lake Berryessa, what evidence do you think would point toward? Excuse me, I told you guys I had been losing my voice for a little bit. But what evidence do you think would point toward the possibility of Lawrence Kane being the Zodiac killer? And Restless Dreams is here. Restless Dreams with a super chat. Hey, thank you so much for that, Restless Dreams. Hi, Ned. I'd like to know, what do you have against Don Cheney being the Zodiac? I think he's by far the best Zodiac suspect. Now, Restless Dreams. I was first introduced to Don Cheney as a Zodiac killer suspect back in 2020. I think that I thought that he was one of the most promising suspects. I thought that Drew Beeson laid out a very clear narrative in his original video series on how and why Don Cheney could have been the Zodiac killer, and I really did think that he should be up to the top of the list. Now, some of the challenges that have been put forward is that Don Cheney provided DNA, handwriting, and fingerprint samples, and he was never arrested. That doesn't mean that they were all negative matches or something like that. It could have been in what's that word? What's that word? Inconclusive. They could have been inconclusive matches. There could have been something like that. Don Cheney resembles the combined composites of the Zodiac killer sketch. You take the Lake Berryessa voyeur and the Stein sketches, plural, and you put them all together, it does look like Don Cheney. Individually, I don't think he resembles those because he has a very, very large receding hairline, and I don't exactly know what his hair looked like, though, on October 11th of 1969. I wish I had been there for all of that stuff. So those are just a few things. And, I mean, Don Cheney seems like a guy, though, that would have had the brain to have been the Zodiac. He was a mechanical engineer. He was someone who was very well educated, but maybe not making the most of his educational aptitude. He was a job hopper. He understood things like pipe stress analytics, and he definitely understood things perhaps like radians, avid big game hunter, someone who would have been very familiar with handling guns and knives. He was somebody who definitely would have had all of the knowledge to be put into the Zodiac things, even the stuff that could be tied to the Navy and the Air Force. Don Cheney was ex-Air Force, and he was also trained in celestial navigation. So that's another point. Lots of strong points for Don Cheney being the Zodiac killer. But wait, where's the smoking gun? Ultimately, where is something like that? And we have a super chat from Batman66. Thank you so much. And by the way, can I reach my other device? I'm going to be off camera for a second. I'm going to be still talking to you guys, but I also want to get to that right now because I want to let you guys know that there is a website, buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnet88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And I just wanted to get the list of everybody who has donated for not only this week, but the past 2 weeks. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday, and also the super chats, super thanks on YouTube. Firstly, giving one to Restless Dreams, right here, right now. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman66 also helps out a lot with the YouTube shorts, and they will be returning tomorrow. I really tried to record one today, actually, in the early AM hours, but as I said, I just wasn't able to talk. I had lost my voice, and I was just actually kind of just talking like this for 2 days. So that's why I sound different today, but thank you for that. And of course, a big thanks to River Prawn Pottery, another very regular and consistent supporter. And we have one over on BuyMeACoffee.com from Classic Chevy Cat, who says, I never tire of Black Box Online Radio. Thanks for the fabulous content, and have a wonderful day, Classic Chevy Cat. Classic Chevy Cat, you have a wonderful day too. Thank you for supporting Black Box Online Radio over the years. You are amazing. And we also have one from Pet917 who says, love this show. Hey, I love your support, Pet917. And one more time, anybody can use the website, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88. And we have one from DNA King as well on buymeacoffee.com. You guys are all amazing. And right now, I'd like to get back to your questions and comments in the live chat. And Cat Daddy Steve is going to say the reasons why he thinks that Lawrence Kane should be a suspect for the Lake Berryessa stabbing, but perhaps not the other crimes. That this is just something that we have to introduce by saying some people look at the Zodiac killer's crimes and they think that, well, the Zodiac might not have done all of them. They are so different. The first two are shootings at Lover's Lane style situations, but then with the Lake Berryessa stabbing, all of a sudden, the killer is now wearing a costume, carrying a knife, carrying a gun, pre-cut lengths of rope, carrying a gun but not using it is what I meant to say. Cat Daddy Steve says, Lawrence Kane was in the area that time and also during the time of Stein's murder. Kane was pulled over in Pahrump, Nevada by a sheriff for speeding on a young woman in his MG convertible who was later found murdered. Ah, yes, but that occurred in 1974, correct? Not 1969. I mean, like, which 1969 woman would that be? Because it sounds like you're talking about the murder of Dana Lowell, which occurred in Nevada, outside of Las Vegas, toward Pahrump in 74. But anything else you'd like to share? Kane was stalking Donna Lass. I'm conjecturing that Kane was a serial killer who glommed onto Zodiac's series. Now, somebody who would hear you out on that is Jeremy Berthume, a person whom I've interviewed on the channel. I have several interviews with Jeremy Berthume. He is the author of So I See You Don't Paint Houses, and Andrew WVA would get along with him because his suspect is Richard Gaikowski. And his theory is that the reason why there's all of this evidence pointing toward Lawrence Kane being the Zodiac is because he did commit crimes. I think that Jeremy Berthume's theory can be put together into a nutshell version by saying that it's that Richard Gaikowski was a prolific serial killer and he got away with it. Lawrence Kane was also a prolific serial killer, got away with it, but he was not the Zodiac. What Lawrence Kane did was he looked at the murder. He looked at the abduction of Kathleen Johns, not a murder, excuse me, the attempted abduction of Kathleen Johns on Route 132 in 1970. And then she is taken to a police station and she points to a poster on the wall and says, that's the man who abducted to me. And it's the wanted poster for the Zodiac killer. And Jeremy Berthume thinks that in reality it was Lawrence Kane. And Lawrence Kane learned about this in the papers and is thinking, hey, this Zodiac killer looks like me. I can now commit a murder and blame it on the Zodiac. So what he did was he murdered Donna Lass and blamed it on the Zodiac. That does mean fabricating the card as well, taking credit for the crime. He thought he could get away with it. And we have one from Jean Guillet, or Jean Gear. I don't know. You got to let me know how to pronounce your name, but I thank you so much for coming on in. And Pahrump, Nevada was where Art Bell lived. Rest in peace to Art Bell. That is from Sigma News, sure. And rest in peace to him. Now, there's something else that I wanted to talk about on the Zodiac Killer News Report, and that is that there is a channel out there called Real Zodiac Killer Revealed, which is run by Adam Ivester. Now, Adam was a guest on this program several times as well, but we had somewhat of a falling out, and he had just asked me to take down the interviews that I did with him, and I agreed to do that. But he is still hard at work over on his channel, Real Zodiac Killer Revealed, talking all about his Zodiac Killer suspect, John Park Cox. For a while, he was putting out 3 videos a day, and that's fine. You have the right to put out 3 videos a day if you choose on your channel, on your personal channel. But what he did was he was just kind of saying the same points over and over again. Just the same information that could be condensed into one video is just divided up into Adam's daily segment over and over again. But I got a notification from his channel because I'm still subscribed, and I watched Zodiac Killer content from countless YouTube channels, even if the person doesn't like me, which a lot of them don't now. I mean, I'll share something about that later on. And I just got this notification that there's a new video on Real Zodiac Killer revealed. So I thought, I'm just going to watch this. And he was talking about how the Zodiac Killer mentioned something in a letter. He gave some information about his whereabouts, and that was that he had a house with a basement. He talks about having a basement. And Robert Graysmith openly shared this in his book Zodiac, talking about how not a lot of people in California would have a house with a basement. And I mean, does that narrow down the search? But Adam actually went back and got the records for John Park Cox, and it's either his house or his mother's house. Actually, there was something at the end that was a little bit confusing, but he's saying that this property that John Park Cox had a basement. And then I was like, all right, Adam, that's something. I wouldn't take that away from you. But somebody who was a little bit more familiar with California real estate documents than me pointed out to him that, now wait a second. If you actually look at the document that Adam put on the screen, it says it was a house with 5 bedrooms. It says bedrooms 5. It was a house with 3 bathrooms. It says bathrooms 3. And it says the word basement. But if it actually had a basement, the way they did it in California was they would say basement 1. It just says the word basement, meaning it did not have a basement. And I think that this is something that is very big about, well, not only Adam Ivester's suspect John Park Cox, but also about the way that Adam chooses to organize the material for his videos. And it's not only him. These comments are not directed only at him or his channel. It goes so far beyond the Zodiac Killer mystery. Because on Wednesdays, I talk to you guys about Jack the Ripper. On Fridays, I now talk to you about DB Cooper. And on Cooper Friday, I was just saying, I'm just hearing this over and over again. People are like, my suspect is the only suspect that has this. My suspect is the only suspect in the mystery that has that. That's what Adam did in his video when he's saying that John Park Cox is the only Zodiac Killer suspect who had a house with a basement. And I'm just like, now, wait a second. There are over 2,500 Zodiac Killer suspects. Are you saying that you analyzed every property that all 2,500 people owned and determined that they didn't have basements? I mean, like, firstly, how could you be certain of that? Number two, Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect in the Zodiac case, had access to homes throughout his lifetime with basements, multiple properties, if I'm not mistaken. And Don Cheney also had a house with a basement. That was in one of Drew Beeson's very first videos. And we have a comment coming in here from Elon Musk. Oh, hey, Elon Musk. I didn't think you'd be stopping by to Black Box Online Radio. What is this channel about? This channel is mostly about true crime, but I focus on the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and DB Cooper, and I talk about true crime stories and shorts and reels that come out sometimes 5 days a week, sometimes 4, maybe 3 or 2 days a week, sometimes, but I put them out on Instagram and Facebook too. The shorts mostly focus on serial killer stories, but sometimes just on major true crime events or different types of true crime events, the ones that would make the papers and so on. But yeah, definitely more geared toward unsolved mysteries and the long form content. And I mean, if I just had more time, if there were more hours in the day, I would do so much more for Black Box Online Radio. There's so many true crime cases that I want to talk to you guys about, like the old Anything Goes Friday segments, the old True Crime Talk Radio segments, where multiple stories would be interconnected within a single episode. Wait for the future. But if anybody can take us there, it'll be Elon Musk. So, Elon, instead of, turning Twitter into X, why don't you turn Black Box Online Radio into one of your spaceship programs or something? Put BBOR on a satellite orbiting the Earth, maybe like the black satellite that goes in the other way, the other direction. Melissa Rose Tappa has a question. Has anybody figured out the connection with the Sierra Nevadas yet? It's very peculiar that he would have activity and draw public attention to it. It must mean something that connects him. I don't know if anyone's figured it out, but Richard Grinnell has some great articles about that when he actually shows that. I mean, it's some good food for thought on how the person who wrote the greeting card involving the Donna Lash disappearance, might have actually been the killer. Very good articles over there. Cat Daddy Steve says ALA had a basement too. Yes, of course. I mean, there are other Zodiac suspects who had basements. It's not only John Park Cox. And the person who wrote that comment, who again was familiar with California real estate documents, is saying that this guy, John Park Cox, didn't even have a basement according to the correct way to read the documents. I'm just sort of a spectator on that channel, but I just wanted to share some things that came out in a recent Zodiac video. Now, Restless Dreams has another super chat, thank you again, and says Paradise, Avery Connection, having having the close murder scenes, Widow's Peak, barrel chested, he confessed, licking ALA stamps. Well, that is one of the big reasons why a lot of people began to suspect Donald Lee Cheney as a Zodiac suspect, because in one of the more famous documentaries, he says that, well, it's possible that I may have licked some of the stamps for Arthur Lee Allen because he didn't like the taste of glue. Arthur Lee Allen did do a DNA test, and they said it was inconclusive. There were also other Zodiac killer suspects that were tested. Shel Cavalli, and what's the other guy's name? Charles Clifton Curtis, like an alternative Zodiac suspect. And they were all negative matches. This was on the ABC primetime show back in 2002. And Mike Rodelli also appeared on that show. And if you would like to watch that full thing, it's available on Tom Voigt's Zodiac Killer official channel. But Mike Rodelli has just come out and just made a very strong and convincing case that they probably don't have the Zodiac Killer's DNA. Those tests were meaningless. And I agree with Mike. But Paradise from Restless Dream says, the Zodiac Killer always wrote the word paradise as Paradice. Now, Don Cheney had a relative named Mary Martha Ingersoll Paradise, spelled Paradice. She's a distant relative, but a relative all the same. I mean, that's got to tell you something that, yes, that's where that could have come from. Don Cheney went to junior college with Paul Avery, the most famous journalist connected to the Zodiac Killer mystery, Bakersfield Junior College. And Don Cheney having Ty close to the murder scene. You mean close to the murder scenes? One of the biggest challenges that Drew Beeson has encountered with his theory involving Don Cheney is, how do you account for Don Cheney not living in the Bay Area when the Zodiac crimes were taking place? He's living in the Bay Area in December of 1968. And then he moves out of the Bay Area, and Drew Beeson came up with this theory that, well, that's how he got away with it. He moves outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, and he comes back on for the Zodiac activities, saying that he was putting on the ruse that he's going on hunting trips because he was an avid big game hunter, just excuses to go back and visit the older stomping ground. And Drew Beeson actually got in touch with somebody whom he said was working with the SFSU, like San Francisco State University. And that guy made some calculations and determined that it would have only taken Don Cheney 6 trips to the Bay Area to mail all of the Zodiac correspondences. 6 times he would have to go from Southern California to Northern California. And I said that it's a challenge because some people say, for example, Mike Morford, whom I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, he just not exactly called Drew Beeson out on. He just asked the question, now wait a second, if this guy's not living in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Zodiac didn't only commit murders. He also wrote letters and cryptograms, made phone calls, but he would have had to have mailed the letters primarily in the San Francisco Bay Area, right? I mean, we have all types of unconfirmed communications. Who knows how far it went? But this is a big challenge that Drew Beeson faced. And the one is the 6 trips. That's all he would need. And the second is, and this is the stuff that Drew gets into a little bit more nowadays, and that is that, was Arthur Lee Allen an active participant? Was Arthur Lee Allen the person who was mailing the letters and Don Cheney is committing the murders? Or was there some type of partnership? Questions more than answers, but yes, that stuff has definitely been brought up. And Arthur Lee Allen and Don Cheney definitely seem to have had some type of falling out. over the years. And we have one from Batman 66. Tom Boyd stated that this case can be solved by California law enforcement. I tend to agree. Why hasn't California committed the resources like they did to the Night Stalker case? I'm not sure. When I was doing the Cooper Friday segment, I say it in multiple episodes. I'm like, how has this case not been solved? The DB Cooper mystery should have been solved. That's like way up here. Like 97%, that should have been solved. The Zodiac is like kind of down here, maybe 53, 54%. Yeah, we should know everything. Who committed all the crimes? Who wrote the letters? They should have figured it out by now. And then Jack the Ripper's like down here, 5% chance, 10% chance that anything could have been solved. Jack the Ripper operated in 1888 before DNA testing, before forensic sciences, or at even anything related that we obtained in the 20th century and 21st centuries. Okay, that's just the way things happen. But why haven't they committed the resources? I don't know, but I'm surprised. It really seems like they should have made more progress. Either that or they have, and they're just not sharing anything. Tyler Scott says, speaking of DB Cooper, there was a NASCAR version. It was solved a year or so ago. Crazy story. A NASCAR DB Cooper? Did somebody like carjack a NASCAR race or something? As long as nobody got hurt, that's pretty cool. I mean, what did they like jump from the car or something? Did they like hold somebody hostage? I'm gonna have to look into that. DB Cooper on wheels. Melissa says, I don't think he had a basement either in California, but yes, he could have had one at different residences or even his Morris basement or his mom's basement. It could have been any basement or not at all. Now, when you said I don't think he had a basement in California, are you referring to John Park Cox, the Zodiac suspect, Melissa? And we have some other people joining in. Firstly, Curtis Johansson is here. Hello, Curtis. And Elon Musk is having a heart attack. No, Elon, come on. I was just hoping we could work together. And heart attack, really? Bruh. Hang in there. I'm always on your side, Elon, 93% of the time. Restless Dream says the Zodiac could be living in New York, but posting his letters using a California address. That's the other issue involving anybody's whereabouts in 1968 and 69. Because one thing that has come to our attention is, yeah, the Zodiac mailed his letters from California, but people used mail forwarding services, and as I understand, there were ways to do it. Oh, Melissa says referring to any Zodiac killer suspect, not just John Park Cox. Sure. And Curtis says, would the Zodiac really send letters from the place that he was living? Now, this ties back into the theory involving Arthur Lee Allen. A couple years ago, there was a video that came out on Tom Voigt's YouTube channel where he was talking about how Arthur Lee Allen got a speeding ticket on March 13th of 1971, and that's the same day that a Zodiac killer letter was mailed from Pemberton, California, and that's like 40 minutes outside of the Bay Area. Now, on the same day that ALA got the speeding ticket, it's almost, was he thinking, I can't mail this letter in San Francisco because I'm placed directly in the vicinity of any kind of mailbox or post office. Everybody was going to know I was there. So does somebody like Arthur Lee Allen drive 40 minutes out of the way to throw people off? That would be exactly what Curtis is talking about. Well, that's what I'm saying. Coincidence? Yeah, could be all a coincidence. And a lot of these things can be answered by coincidences, where it just turns out that there are a lot of people doing a lot of things, and there are a lot of intersections. All of the observations that I've made about how the Zodiac was influenced by Jack the Ripper, those could be all coincidental, or even better than coincidences in that case, similar psychological patterns. They had similar lousy childhoods. But now, I do have one final thing to share with you guys in terms of Zodiac Killer news, and that is that there is a website out there called ZodiacKillerX.com, which is run by an individual named Angela Blevins, and her Zodiac Killer suspect is named Mike Klein, James Michael Klein. And he is actually still currently alive, but she doesn't seem to back down at all from sharing publicly that she thinks that he was the Zodiac killer. And she wanted to share something with me that the case file section, which she has been working on for some time, is now finally available on ZodiacKillerX.com, which talks about a very involved and intricate theory about how Mike Klein could have committed additional murders, which isn't uncommon in the Zodiac world, but this one is done in a completely different stance. James Michael Klein was a driver for Levi Strauss Jeans at the time, making deliveries in the San Francisco Bay Area during the summer and fall of 1969 when the Zodiac was operating. He was originally from Arkansas, and you can find out more about him on ZodiacKillerX.com. I also have a Zodiac Killer news report from March, I believe, with him in the thumbnail. And Charlie is here, and Charlie says the NASCAR DB Cooper version was a guy making and using the alias LW Wright, and he conned people into giving him sponsor money to buy a NASCAR by telling him that he was a pro racing driver. That sounds more like advance fee fraud or some type of con man scheme. Now, DB Cooper is a Zodiac killer suspect as well, and he's the suspect of David Gold, who believes that DB Cooper, the Zodiac, and the Texarkana Phantom killer were all the same person. Frankly, Morris, it's the subject of the book My Dance with the Zodiac Killer, is also the suspect of an individual named Ray Penrod, who believes his suspect was the Zodiac and DB Cooper. Ray Penrod has a suspect named Richard Ralph Mangan, and I'm going to have to do this for you on the old-fashioned Zodiac Killer news report with the images on the screen, because I just want to go through all of the suspects that I can think of and compare them to the composite sketches. You might be thinking the composite sketches are not that valuable. Well, I want to do that. And one of the suspects that I think actually resembles the Zodiac sketches a lot is Richard Ralph Mangan. Do I think he was the Zodiac? No. Flat voice, no. Not at all. But I think it's an interesting mental exercise. Because, you got to look at the full package theory. Primarily, Ray Penrod's evidence is about how this guy thinks that his suspect was DB Cooper, and then just kind of like later on, also the Zodiac also confessed to the Zodiac, but his core pieces of evidence talk about him being DB Cooper, and he just begins to say that it's he's kind of like reworking it as a Zodiac theory. I just think that would be fascinating. Look at people like Arthur Lee Allen doing the comparisons, Gaikowski, Kane, the famous suspects we've been talking about. But how about some of the other ones out there, such as James Michael Klein, Richard Ralph Mangan, Frank Morris, and Melissa is here. She has a suspect named Loring Dale Hill. Just kind of putting everybody up and kind of just doing like a back and forth lineup, switching between the composites and the photos of these particular suspects. And we have Angela here who says, yes, hey, Angela, just plugging ZodiacKillerX.com. I surmise the basement is by Battery Street at Levi Strauss, where the daily delivery route is organized. Mike Klein hung out in the location from 69 to 74. And as I said, Angela runs ZodiacKillerX.com, and her case file page is now up and running over on that website. Please feel free to visit. Hindle Walker is here who says, I still feel the Zodiac lived near where the taxi driver died, and that the killing wasn't planned but happened due to something that occurred on the journey. Hindle, I wish more than anything we knew the killer's identity, but secondarily, I wish we knew what was said in Paul Stine's taxi before he was murdered. I wish we did. Now, Irish Brummy says, what do you think about James Huberty as a Zodiac suspect? Before he did the McDonald's mass shooting, he told his wife he was going to hunt humans. I'm not familiar with this guy, James Huberty. He was a McDonald's shooter. I'm going to have to look into him because I'm always learning about new stories. I'm going to make a mental note of this. James Huberty. And Sigma News says, do you think the Zodiac could have shown himself on the streets of San Francisco with a TV series? You mean like he's walking around waiting for the cameras, and that he's kind of waiting in the background because he thinks that there's going to be this call coming in? Anything's possible. Who am I to say that that's not? I don't necessarily think the Zodiac would do that, but that's purely just my guess. I don't have a lot to support that. But during the middle part of this episode, I was going to talk to you guys about something, and that was about how lots of people in the world hate my guts. And this was something that I had been thinking about. I'm actually coming to you from Southeast Asia, but I'm a West Virginian at heart, and I was thinking next year, 2025, when I was back in West Virginia, I was going to try and organize something called the True Crime Road Trip, which would have been mostly Zodiac related, but now I'm getting more into DB Cooper. And, if anybody wants to talk about any true crime case under the sun or in the darkness, I do that on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. And I just noticed that a lot of people were all kind of in line on the East Coast. Like, say, for example, when I interviewed Jeremy Berthium, we did that in Boston, Massachusetts, and, like, okay, that's sure. And then, like, Ray Grant lived in Pennsylvania. That's one there. And a lot of BBOR supporters are in Pennsylvania and fans and followers. And then Adam Ivester actually lived in the Carolinas in South Carolina. And then Dale Julin, who wrote the book Catching Zodiac, he's in Georgia, and Mike Morford's in Florida. And I just began to think, all of this stuff is all in line on the East Coast. I just thought it would be fascinating to do some type of like on camera, microphone in hand discussions where we're just kind of sitting outside when the sun is nice or something and just having really long, extended conversations. Because when I did the first interview with Jeremy Berthium, it was 3 hours and 42 minutes. And that is the most viewed episode of Black Box Online Radio. And this isn't purely done for viewership. I don't think any of these true crime road trip videos would have had the same amount of views. It's just more that I thought that it was a really good interview experience, like how Joe Rogan talks about podcasting has a very different type of format because there are no time limits. You can do as much as you want. You just kind of sit there, talk about anything, just go back and forth and look at how maybe the Zodiac is connected to these other true crime cases. But guess what? Everybody hates my guts now. More interviews I've done, the more people are just thinking, I don't ever want to talk to that Ned guy again or something. And it happens because you can't be on everybody's side all the time. And people are going to have disagreements. And, you know, um, all of these people that I've mentioned have Zodiac suspects. I don't agree with any of them, but I would talk to them about it, and like the same way I did my most recent interview series last year in November of 2024, 2023. I forget what year it is. I forget how old I am. I forget absolutely everything. It's like, do you ever have those moments like, no, which thing happened first? Did I do that before or after college? Oh, yeah, I did it after college when I was 29 years old. Everything just gets blurred together. And Batman66 says, can you do a future podcast on the Mike Klein suspect? I have one out there on like a portion of it on the Zodiac Killer News Report. And then I would love to talk more about Angela because she's working on some new stuff. I don't want to give things away without her permission. And then, Melissa says, we're up for a Zodiac road trip. Yes, I've interviewed Melissa and her husband, Jeff. They've been on the channel, and we did that as like a face-to-face discussion. I would love to do something that nationwide proportions, end in San Francisco, start in West Virginia, end in San Francisco. But the problem is, though, the more I talk to people, the less they want anything to do with me. And sometimes it's because they don't get an endorsement for a suspect. Other times it's done because of offline disputes, and other times it's done for very personal reasons that I can't even talk to you about on the air. And well, that's the long and short of it. But I should be very clear. Mike Morford is not included in that group of people that hates my guts. Morph and I were talking a lot about the Donna Lass case. I even appeared on his show, Zodiac Speaking. And I mean it, though. Please go over and check out Citizen Detective. That is with not only Mike Morford, but also with Alex Ralph and Lee Miller and Cloyd Steiger. And it's a very, very thoughtful and intelligent true crime show with people who are real experts. I've been a guest on that program, and from the get-go, I realized, okay, wow, these people are real experts, and I'm just some guy from the hills of West Virginia who's mumbling along to stuff. And Curtis says, you're the best, Ned. Pound it, Curtis. Thanks so much. Give him hell, Ned. Sometimes you have to. That's just life. And Cat Daddy Steve says, anyone who hates Ned is a psychotic weirdo. Cat Daddy Steve, a little bit of psychosis isn't too bad. A whole lot of psychosis will mess your day up. It really is. It really is. Oh, Cat Daddy Steve says that he's a member of the Citizen Detective. Right on. Right on. Yeah, it's a good show. Hindle says, interesting chat, Ned. Well done. From England. Across the pond. Across two ponds, actually. Right on. Thank you so much, Hindle. And I'm going to be winding down right now. Thank you so much for listening to this Zodiac News Report, which was really just a stop on by. Talk to you guys about a little bit of Zodiac news, new observations from the Santa Rosa hitchhiker case, as well as the videos on Real Zodiac Killer revealed. If you want to hear something different, feel free to visit Adam's channel. And please visit Angela's website, ZodiacKillerX.com. That will be all for me now. And soon I'm going to put the links back in the description box, but you guys know where to find everything. Facebook, Ned Dahan, me, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, and I put out reels over there too. You can also write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And of course, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88. You guys know all the stuff, but I'll be putting stuff out in the description box right now. That's all for me. Good.